In an era of rapid technological evolution, consumer-grade drones are reshaping modern warfare. Military tech expert Robert Cook warns that swarms of these inexpensive drones can slip past sophisticated defense systems, exposing critical vulnerabilities in the high-tech military defense systems that we have in Western armed forces. Today on Strategic Wisdom with Andrew Jose, I and Cook will explore how this readily available off-the-shelf technology is shaping the battlefield and what it means for the future of military strategy. Thank you for tuning in to Strategic Wisdom with Andrew Jose. Let's head straight to the interview. Robert Cook is a multifaceted individual whose life spanned several roles: Eagle Scout, shooter, soldier, entrepreneur, venture capitalist, vintner, and now celebrated author. A United States Army Vietnam veteran, Cook achieved the rank of major and was awarded the Bronze Star Medal and the Army Commendation Medal. His distinguished military service also earned him the Parachutist Badge. In 1987, Cook was honored as the KPMG Entrepreneur of the Year for the Metropolitan Washington, D.C. region, recognizing his significant contributions to the business world. Cook's literary acclaim includes being the author of the only fiction book on Bill Gates' summer 2013 reading list. Robert Cook, great to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
How would you say, Robert, the access of commercial drones has changed the modern battlefield? How serious of a threat we are talking? How serious of a threat they are to military equipment?
Well, I think that unmanned vehicles are going to change the nature of warfare. You know, we spend a lot of money trying to pick up a helicopter pilot or a fighter pilot that bailed out. When we're using drones, the drones are costing $500 a piece and there's nobody on them. So we can use a lot more. We can arm them, put them more dangerous places. So there's a lot of impact of the commercial drone space in modern warfare, and it's going to get a lot bigger. I see that the Gerald Ford's gone to the Gulf, and the reason that modern carrier would go to the Gulf, there's a laser on it that'll shoot down 1,000 drones in 10 minutes at 200 miles. And I talked about the first of the laser weapons that was tried out in destroyer Ponce back in 2014. And they've got a long way since then. So it's drones and being able to defend against drones. Because I don't believe something like the Iron Dome can do much against thousands of drones, and that's probably why the Ford is in the area.
Over the course of recent years, we've seen the resurgence of cheap technology, lightweight, cheap technology fielded against high-tech weapons on the battlefield. Now, whether in the case of Iran, this comes in the form of small boats used to harass larger ships that are characteristic of the equipment of the United States Navy. With the Houthis, you have land-to-sea missiles being fired, but also you have small boats and helicopters used to board large ships. How would this revolution of cheaper technology being widely available pose a serious threat to the to conventional armies that field more sophisticated equipment? And if you were to list out the main challenges that come with it, whether it's cost-wise or the attacked conventional army, or any other way, how would you put it?
Well, I agree that the inexpensive commercial technology is revolutionizing warfare. As we mentioned earlier, the drones, the unarmed aerial vehicles, are a big deal, and they're cheap. And if we shoot $1 million Tomahawk and a $25 missile, that's a bad trade. They can hold out as long as we can. So we need to worry about that. And I suspect that defense is more complicated than offense because you can't get it wrong once. When you do, you're down. And I'm afraid that's what Israel's trying to figure out how to stay out of.
One thing that is characteristic, I'd say, of the Western way of making weaponry is we focus a lot on the qualitative aspect of weaponry. We focus on quality over quantity. And would you say that it's time we shift our strategy to a quantity-based manufacturing for the defense industry approach?
Probably not. Take the example that I used earlier of the laser weapon on the carrier of Gerald Ford, how powerful it is. Well, that was first investigated in 2010, deployed in 2014, and 10 years later, it might be used in combat. And if we can shoot down anything in the air for 200 miles, including $25 drones, you lose. Well, you'll never get close enough to do any damage. And we can send things in to do whatever damage we want, including unarmed drones. You know, when we think about what people might do in Lebanon, Hezbollah, if they're getting their drone supply from Iran, and Iran is building drone weapons for the Russians, one of the things they're getting in return in Iran is high-tech, very well-engineered intelligence about how do you fight U.S. weapon systems, defense weapon systems. So if they've got harm missiles, high-speed flight on a radar beam missiles, that'll really complicate things. So it's a game as always. First side builds a tank, the other side builds a tank. Next side builds a jet fighter, the other side builds a jet fighter. Now we're having to deal with unmanned aerial vehicles, sea vehicles, drone boats. So it's interesting. It's fun to watch. I think Israel's I made a case in my book. I think Israel's making an existential bet they don't have to make.
But when it comes to the laser, Bob, doesn't the laser itself become expensive? What are the economics of using the lasers you talk of? Because lasers rely on a lot of energy. So would it still be an effective option if we were to mount these lasers on different military installations and different boats? We still have to find an energy, right? So how would you say that we could do that in a cost-effective way?
Well, we're about 20 years into laser technology. And you're right, they're power hogs. The Ford has a huge nuclear reactor on it. And it can supply all the power that anybody needs first, as long as anybody needs it. That's less true of a diesel-powered destroyer. So yeah, it's evolving. But I think the battlefield, the challenge, as you pointed out, is to be able to do all this cost effectively. And one of the reasons that we won the Cold War was we just outspent the Russians. They couldn't keep up. Well, we'll see what happens to the Chinese, but they are pretty good at building small, cheap electronically sophisticated devices. And they'll get around to building their weapon systems that way.
Bob, I want to steer the conversation towards the way our military-industrial complex is structured here in the United States. Now, with the Chinese, they have a large network of factories that produce weapons. Of course, they do not necessarily have the same private defense company structure that we do have here in Washington with Raytheon and the whole oligopoly there. But would you say that if we are to produce cheaper weaponry on a large scale, with a qualitative edge, of course, shouldn't we reform the way we interact with the defense industrial complex to open it up to competition so more players can enter in? Because, I mean, from my observations, I know you're more specialized in this, being someone who has been in the defense industry and worked in the military for a while. It appears, at least from my vantage point, that as long as there are a few major players, we're going to be constrained by their own manufacturing capabilities than if there were several players in the defense industry and everyone has their own little factory and produces goods for the U.S. military. What are your thoughts on that, Bob?
Well, I guess on one hand, I'd say you're preaching to the choir. I think that the procurement system is fairly well broken. And you see that manifested in quite a few more sole source contracts being let through DARPA and DOD, getting the smaller players in. But in general, you get somebody like Lockheed Martin, they have 20 years of contracts deep in the bowels of the Defense Department. And the good news is they're ethical and they're hardworking, but it's dangerous. And there are only, 10 of them? It isn't many. It's Lockheed and Boeing and Northrop and a bunch of others, Rockwell, I suppose. And the only subs are being built, Newport News, by one company in it. So, and it's a good company. They're doing good. They're in trouble recruiting. Maybe they could build them someplace else and recruit easier. I don't know. Specialized set of welders and that kind of stuff. But yeah, there is room in the Department of Defense for more soul searching. And then you have to get everything through the bubbling Congress. And it makes it harder. So I don't know what the right answer is, but I agree with you. The procurement systems in DOD are a problem.
What are other forms of commercial technologies other than drones, that you see as going to be decisive in conflicts in the near future or in a couple of years after the near future?
Well, one of the things that I mentioned in my last two books is Pulse, which was about the U.S. preemptive attack on Iran, and New in the Mahdi, which is about Israel confiscating West Bank land. And we're seeing all that come true today. But stop. Remind me of the questions.
So the question I wanted to ask is, what other commercial technologies other than drones are going to be decisive in future conflicts? Other than drones, that is.
The technology involved in electromagnetic pulse, which I've covered in 3 or 4 of my books of the Kush series, is miniaturizing it. It started out as an area weapon, and that's the way North Korea sees it today, where they pop a 2 megaton nuke over Nebraska, and they shut the lights out in the whole country, and they can do that. The trick is to get it here, and they have the technology to set it up. But we worry about that. So EMP is being in the Pulse book. EMP was on Tomahawks, missiles that flew over Iran and put a burst on different parts of Iran and screwed up their electrical infrastructure. And Boeing demonstrated that 2013, 14, 15. So we don't know where they are, or we are, in the case that we need it. And we don't know where anybody else is in the case that they need it. So there is this dance going on of trying to get the right mix of cheap technology and well-researched, expensive technology in a way that you get an advantage on the battlefield. These days, you get an advantage and really need to keep it for 3 days. If I worry about the stuff that's going on right now, in that if Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis manage to overcome the Israeli defenses to the point they can destroy the Air Force on the ground, I mean, it's over. It would take a week to fix that with U.S. Air. And there would be Muslims all over Israel getting revenge for what they perceive as, 50, 60 years of bad behavior part of the Israelis since 1948. So we'll see.
But with electromagnetic pulse, is there a reason? Well, before that, how does the technology work? So, as someone who's unexposed to it, I wanted to ask you: does it work like they detonate this nuke on top of a city, and does it only fry the electronics that are near the area of explosion, and then when people bring in electronics from areas that were unexposed from the initial explosion, would they still work in the area where that electromagnetic field weapon was detonated, or does it create this dead zone? How does it work?
Well, it creates a zone. I think how big that zone is depends on the yield of the weapon. And originally that was a nuke, so they could create an awful lot of pulse for the energy released in a nuclear weapon. And now with the smaller ones, if you fly a tomahawk over an area and you can detonate the weapon where you want, it will just seek out silicon and copper in the area where it was designed to target. So you can bring new equipment in and it'll work. But you have all the charging stations, all the car wiring, all the household wiring has to be replaced. It's burned forever. Well, when that stuff's fried, it's really fried. So, and the biggest three things that electromagnetic pulse likes is copper, silicon, that kind of thing. And
how could? Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
And with copper and silicon, you've just taken out a whole bunch of stuff in this world, because all the chips in phones, all the chips in anything go dead. Your cars go dead because the wiring got fried. How big's the area? Depends on the size of the pulse. Now, I write fiction, so I can make it as big as I need. And in this last book, they're taking rocks that were 3D printed by the resident genius to create a EMP blast with certain vector and width. And so you can do anything you want, but that's fiction. I don't know that we're down there. I don't know that we're not. When I wrote about Pulse, in Pulse about the laser and Ponce, the destroyer, I didn't know where it went from there. Now I know. I found it out for this book, but all this stuff is in the internet. But you look it up.
In an age where we're getting closer to the use of electromagnetic pulse weapons, how dangerous would you say is our current reliance on electronics? And I'm not talking about consumer reliance on electronics. I'm talking about the military's reliance on sophisticated satellite networks, uh, on electronics, especially. Would this eventually come to bite us in the back as people tend to lose skills in navigation by looking at a map alone? And how do you think that the electronization and the increasing reliance on technology on the part of of the U.S. military would spell doom for the United States when there's an EMP weapon used? And how can we make the defense establishment resistant to an EMP weapon? What technology should we be taking out and replacing in anticipation of an EMP attack on the homeland?
Well, I think that the military has got its offensive weapons pretty well shielded against strikes. You're going to lose trucks and things like that aren't shielded. But the main battle systems are all pretty well shielded, I think. They claim they are. And that's because the electromagnetic pulse is a byproduct of a nuclear blast. When they popped a nuke in Bikini Atoll in 1948 or 50 or whatever it was, it turned the lights on 1,600 miles away in Honolulu. And so, yeah, we're exposed. But our big exposure, I believe, strategically, is in a domestic grid. This is old-fashioned, not protected, easy to mess with. I think we have a lot of exposure, national security exposure, in our domestic electric grid. Machines that make artillery shells aren't hard.
Before we finish our conversation, Bob, could you share with our audience about your books and what's like the main plot line of them, and what inspired you to write your most recent books, and any books that you're planning to write in the future?
Sure. I've written 4 of what I call the Kunch series of geopolitical national security thrillers. I look at the politics, I look at military technology. When I don't have what I need to tell my story, I make it up because it's fiction. And what I made up in my last book was the shrinking of the EMP into a fusible direction weapon, and left room in new books for it to be shrunk even further. And when I started the first one, I was in Vietnam, and we were on a tourist trip in 1996 or 98. And I was in the bow of a cruise ship and heading out of Saigon River up the Sunshine Sea to Da Nang. And we got into a typhoon. And it was 60 knot seas, 40 knot seas across, 40-foot bows across, waves across the bow. It was really an ugly storm, and I don't get seasick. But everybody else in the doggone boat did. So I would go up every day, put my hand out, get the key to the bar, and get out and have 2 glasses of wine and take the key back and go back to my room. Pretty quickly, I figured I needed something to do. So I wrote my first book, and it was about a kid who got in trouble in high school and got stuck in the Marine Corps quickly, and then into the CIA Special Ops, and became a explosives expert and a martial arts expert in the 8 years he was there. So everything flowed from there. The second book was about Yemen, where the Houthis are now, and a nerve gas attack in Dallas Stadium, and how you handle that. And the third one was this Iran suffers a preemptive attack by the United States because they're about to pop an air-delivered EMP nuke over Israel. And Israel is a country the size of New Jersey. And if you get Tel Aviv and Haifa and Jerusalem, you get most of it anyhow. Or Sheba, maybe. But that's a small place to try to deliver a weapon like that. So we helped the Israelis, and they defeated that attack. And then the last book that I've done so far is called The Mahdi. The Mahdi in Muslim life. It's sort of the second coming of Muhammad. And by this time, my protagonist has had a graduate degree in Islamic studies for several years, and he's the kind of guy that can be effective in the Muslim world. And his business is a Bedouin business. He lives in Tangier and was an heir from his grandfather. And he gets elected by the Bedouin tribes, of whom there are 1 million spread across the Middle East with no real government of their own, to try to recover the Israeli confiscation of West Bank lands, which is going on right now. It's in the news. They're attacking West Bank settlers as we speak because they're getting too active in their support of their Palestinian brethren. And that's going to be a topic of some merit for some time. And I think that with that last book, I made a case that the Thucydides trap, which was in the Peloponnesian Wars, the cities were general, and he determined that Sparta figured out that Israel was up and coming, and they were going to catch up to him, and if they didn't attack him now, they wouldn't be able to in a few years. And Israel doesn't believe that, I don't think, or they would be doing things differently than they are today. But I make that case in my book, where the trap's closing in 10 years. They won't have the nuclear hegemony that they have today. They won't have the communications hegemony they have today. They probably won't be as strong relatively as they are today as the best army in the world, man for man. So they're taking a chance on their existence. And I think it's because they have a thug as prime minister. And maybe I'm wrong. And I'm watching with a great deal of interest. Right now, I think the Iranians and Hezbollah would be crazy to try to attack 1,000 drones an hour. If Ford can shoot down 10,000 an hour, sooner or later, those carriers have to go.
Thank you so much, Bob. Ladies and gentlemen, you just listened to military tech expert Robert Cook. Robert Cook, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the chance to speak. Thank you very much.
Strategic Wisdom with Andrew Jose is an initiative of Andrew Jose Media. The views expressed by guests on this show do not necessarily represent the official positions and opinions of Andrew Jose, Andrew Jose Media, and Strategic Wisdom.
Thank you for listening to Strategic Wisdom. Be sure to follow and subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you are using to listen to this show in order to not miss out any future interviews and conversations that Andrew Jose will bring to you on this podcast. We're streaming on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Yandex, JioSaavn, Amazon Music, and many other podcast streaming services. Also, be sure to subscribe to Strategic Wisdom on Substack at strategicwisdom.substack.com and to follow Strategic Wisdom on Twitter and Instagram at StratWisdom. Do support our work by buying from our merch store. For more details, visit strategicwisdom.substack.com.